All right, then I think we can get started. I hope you guys can hear me well. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so happy to see you guys here. You guys can keep continuing, adding your introductions in the chat, and we can start now. I'm actually excited for today's session. So, today's session is actually a partner session between Salesforce and ADPList. For those who don't know, we have recently partnered with Salesforce, which is number one CRM company. And the reason is very solid. We want to democratize education and mentorship around the world. And we want to make mentorship a key part of the organization's social impact goal and make it easy and open access to millions of communities for mentorship and education. For today's session, we have an amazing person here, Kyrsten, who is a senior director for HLS Ignite Studio at Salesforce. She has more than 20 years of experience building brands, transforming the customer experience with new behaviors, processes, digital experience, product, and innovation. So welcome, Kyrsten. Thank you so much for your time, for being here. I'm looking forward for your session today. And without any delays, passing it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction and your partnership and the not only amazing things that you're doing with the ADPList, but also for bringing us in. We're just so humbled and honored to be here. And I feel very privileged to get to work with so many wonderful creatives and designers on the phone. So thank you for your time today. So as Miriam mentioned, my name is Kyrsten Musich. I am based outside of New York City in New Jersey, and have been working in kind of the brand creative design innovation space my entire career. So have gotten to experience a lot and see a lot and actually work around the globe. So thank you for all of those calling in. I saw folks dialing in from Malaysia and from Paris. So just feel very honored to have you all here and that we can have these connections together. So a little bit of what we'll go into today. I'll talk a little bit more kind of about myself and what it means to be a whole brand, kind of how I've thought about it and cultivated it over the course of my career. And I'll establish a little credibility, right? So many of you are probably like, why are you talking about this? And what does this mean? So I'll talk a little bit about, what perspective I'm bringing in and why I'm thinking about it that way. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of how leadership is being reframed today, and what that means, and why then thinking about yourself as a leadership brand is kind of a best practice that's emerging among all types of leaders at all different levels, in all different ways. And then I have a little bit of a practical guide into getting started. So a couple of caveats. I'm going to apologize if I'm going to try to toggle between chat and everything. So please feel free to add comments. There's some interactive sections here. It's not certainly meant for me to just talk the whole time. I definitely want your input and feedback on this. Since we have a smaller group, feel free to kind of jump in as well. Don't hesitate to ask questions or anything along those lines. So to start off with, who am I and why me for this talk, right? Why did ADPList decide that I was worthy to speak to you on this topic? And I think some reasons. One, my day-to-day life does look very similar to this. I am a mom of two. It has been a newer journey for me. I just started that journey 3.5 years ago with my daughter, and then had my son 18 months ago. So I'm learning how to be a new type of leader as a mom. I have done executive strategy and executive leadership kind of as a chief of staff for 10 plus years. So I worked with chief marketing officers. I've worked with CEOs of very large companies such as Red Hat. I have been working with boards and all different types of levels early on in my career. And Molly who's from my team as well as on here, we were given a lot of privilege at a small consulting firm to take on really, really big projects for a lot of senior level executives. So I've gotten to make a lot of mistakes in building leadership brands and in building all types of brands, but also got a lot of exposure early on. I was a marketing executive for almost 7 years. So I actually led creative teams. I am actually not a creative by background. Well, maybe a little bit. I always aspired when I was like 8, I wanted to own my own design gallery. I was a painter and a sculptor, worked with a lot of mixed media, but realized my craft, if you will, is business strategy. So my canvas is thinking about how to drive growth in businesses and what that looks like, but in a triple bottom line fashion. So I really think a lot about innovation. I think about how do we build more inclusive experiences for people, and that's my day-to-day job. I did go to Duke and Emory undergrad. I'm a triathlete, I'm a runner, tennis player. So if there's any athletes out there that can connect with, happy to talk about that. I like to do my Peloton. So anyone who got into that trend over the last couple of years, I'm a world traveler and I'm half Danish. So my whole mom side of my family is from Denmark. So any of my Scandinavian brethren that's out there, sending a cheers and a shout out to you. So just a quick, you can kind of use the raise hand, or you can put in the chat, but how many of you have actually considered yourself a brand before, or kind of thought about that notion as it relates to a person? Okay, Gabby, Molly, Kyla. All right, we've got a few hands raised there. Well, the truth of the matter is, so if some of you have considered yourself a brand, how many of you have then actively built a brand strategy for yourself? Have any of you gone that far? Okay, awesome. Well, that's a little bit of what we'll get into today. So why am I talking about leadership and brand and how it relates together? I thought brands applied to companies and not people. And some of you might be thinking, well, I'm not a leader today, right? I'm just an individual contributor, or I'm trying to start my career or figure out what's next in my career, or I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm kind of in a different spot in the design community. The truth of the matter is, kind of the way the world's shaping today, is that we have to redefine the definition of a leader. I believe that a leader is everyone, because everyone influences someone. And this has become even more true. And we've seen this come to play in the United States, certainly in the last couple of years. But with social media, with kind of digital technology and digital experiences, we are influencing people every single day and we don't even realize it. I think I didn't really learn this lesson true to the core, although I've been presenting on it for years and helping chief marketing officers think about this exact quote for years. But I didn't really digest it until I became a mom. And as soon as I've seen my daughter now pick up some of my behaviors or latch on to one little phrase I use once, but now it's become her go-to phrase, I realize how much you can have influence on other people. And as a result of that, how much, no matter what our position is at work or kind of what our position is in life, that we all have this role to play as leaders, because we all influence someone. We all have a ripple effect. And so then what does that mean as we think about it as creatives, as we think about it as designers, where our visual storytelling can actually change the way that people perceive an issue or the way that people can come together. So I started to think about this concept a little bit more and really look into, well, what does that mean then, right? If we all influence someone, if we all are leaders in some capacity, then we have to redefine what modern leadership is, and the core values that set up modern leadership. It turns out that I am not the smartest person, nor the only person thinking about this. And so an amazing leader named Charlene Lee, who I've gotten the privilege to meet a couple of times, wrote a book several years ago. It's a little bit older now, but called The Engaged Leader. And it was really around the same notion of how do you build a digital brand as a leader? How do you really use digital transformation best practices and kind of human-centered design best practices to think about your leadership brand? And what she starts to talk about as modern leadership is radical transparency as a value, bringing your whole self to work, which is why you'll also see on my LinkedIn profile a picture of me with my son just in a diaper. The data-driven aspect of being a leader. So how do you continuously measure how you're actually having an impact and how you're actually coming off? And then team-based. What does that actually mean to be part of a team and to work as a team? And thanks for everyone who just joined too. I just saw someone joining from Delhi in India. I've actually been there. So excited to have you and so grateful to have you here. So if we take those values a step further, I think this quote from Charlene from her book brings it to life a little bit more. Being a modern leader today is about having the confidence, but humility to give up the need to be in control. And to do that, it means that you have to inspire the commitments from people to accomplish goals. But it also means that you have to stay close to that data-driven aspect of, kind of where are you going? What does that mean? And using kind of the ability to give up control in a way to actually, here, you're going to, my kids just came in the door. Sorry, everybody. So it's a little bit about that notion of like giving up control in order to gain more buy-in, in order to scale your abilities to do so. So what does this all mean with brands, right? And kind of what does it mean from a design aspect? And as we think about our personal brands, our leadership brands, how do we start to think about then taking those values of radical transparency, of data-driven and of whole self, and really bring them into, and team-based, and really bring them into what does it mean to build brands? Well, another quote to inspire this space is, if we start to think about a brand as a living entity, then it makes a lot more sense why you can apply it to humans, and why you can apply it to yourself and your career. And so if you kind of cultivate brands and cultivate kind of your personal brand as you want to display it into the world as a series of cumulative events, of cumulative small gestures, right, that can be enriched or undermined over time, as Michael Eisner says here, then you start to kind of think about your career, your resume, your portfolio, how you're working with different teams, the relationships you want to maintain or you choose not to, in a whole different light, right? And it kind of gives a different perspective on how to cultivate a career today, which is the most exciting part for me, because it allows everyone, again, to be that leader and to participate in building their own brand in the way that's most meaningful to them. So I just want to put in kind of, I picked some key brands that exist out there from a leadership standpoint. And some of them are very unlikely leaders, right? Some of them are only 16 or 17 now. Some of them came into leadership because of tragic events. They didn't necessarily ask for it 100%. And some people have transform their role and their leadership over time and by who they choose to associate themselves with. So I'm just curious if everyone kind of can associate with these figures here. And if you want to put in the chat any thoughts around what these different brands or individuals mean to you. And feel free, if some of you are very passionate about any one of these figures, feel free to come off mute. And it doesn't all have to be positive, so that's okay too. That's part of the brand building process. Any thoughts from anyone? Anyone who knows who all these people are? Yep, George Clooney. Yep, that's one of them. And Amal, his wife. Yep, Greta Thunberg. Yep, she's a huge advocate for climate change and climate action. She's also a huge, wonderful story about neurodiversity, right? And kind of what that looks like in the world today. Awesome. And then the last person on here is Malala. And she is one of my personal heroes, one of my personal favorite kind of brand stories. Yeah, thanks, Gabby. Yeah. And I've actually gotten the chance to meet Malala in person. She spoke at one of the large conferences I put on in my last job. And I have to say, I've never gotten to meet George Clooney or Amal or Greta, but meeting Malala, you just feel the energy field that's different around her. It's a really amazing and unique experience. And she is one of those people who never thought of herself as a brand in the past until she realized how much influence she could have over different situations by really fostering what that brand is about her. Now, sometimes, and for those of you who maybe know Ellen DeGeneres, for example, sometimes cultivating these brands and these perceptions of yourself that maybe live beyond even kind of what you can control is difficult too, right? Like she has talked about the fact that, like, you know, she grew up in Pakistan, obviously, but was kind of the force behind education and really helping girls to read and kind of what that can do and how that can change their life. And that's a lot of what she does now, but it's like not the only thing about her. So she would tell some stories about when people were like shocked that she would like go out. I think the example was like she went out roller skating or, you know, did something that was very like mundane, that was like a lot of fun. And people were kind of like, oh, Malala like does normal things like everyone else. So that's kind of the other part about brand building. Awesome. So I bring up these folks because all of them at some point realized that if they thought about their platform, if they thought about their values and kind of who they are, what they can do, what they can bring in a different way, that they could live bigger and bolder than just what one individual would normally have kind of the capability to achieve, right? And really thought about that personification of their brand in new and different ways. And so as we think about that, I think some of the things that have rung true, and these are lessons that I have learned, kind of 4 principles as you think about building your own personal career brand, that I always fall back on. When I helped launch Colgate Optic White back in the day, I helped refurbish the Red Hat brand and a couple other brands. And anytime we got stuck in brand building, I came back to these 4 principles because this is really what it takes. This is why Malala rings true for so many of us, and we can connect to her story, is because it's a very simple one about what she wanted and what she was standing for. It had a lot of purpose and meaning behind it. It was guiding into how people might want to connect and behave in the future. And at the end of the day, it was connected to a universal human truth that many people could connect with. And so these 4 guiding principles, kind of in that notion of modern leadership, right, with radical transparency, whole self as your values, can kind of become your checklist of, am I building a brand that can be authentic to myself, that I can maintain over time, and that can have kind of relevance and scale beyond just yourself as an entity, if you will. And so one thing I wanted to get into a little bit is some thoughts around what actually impacts your personal brand. And I think one big thing to note as we talk about personal brand and building it, or rather influencing it, is that you're not always in control of your personal brand. And so I think it is one of the hardest things, and why so many people don't actively and intentionally build a leadership brand for themselves, is because you don't have full agency over it. You don't have full control over your personal brand. You can only influence it over time. And that's kind of why I like that Michael Eisner quote as well, is because it's about those small gestures. It's about the little things that you do on a regular basis. And then those add up to the bigger things kind of throughout your career that allow you to kind of have that sense of influence over how people perceive you and how people relate to you, and the scale that you can have over time. So I'm curious kind of for people's thoughts as they've thought about building their own brand or have leaned into building any type of presence for themselves, what they think kind of impacts their personal brand, and kind of how other people might engage with that brand. Any thoughts in the chat? We have a quiet group today. I hope it's probably because it's late other times around the world. So any thoughts or questions? Okay, we'll keep moving forward. So different influences on your personal brand. This is obviously not exhaustive, but these are just some things that maybe you all don't think about in terms of what matters in building your brand or influencing it over time. One is consistency of experience and connections. And so consistency as part of a brand in and of itself is kind of a core tenet. It's part of that simple, guiding, purposeful. Yeah, so Kyla, you're talking about consistency is a big factor. That's exactly right. And then storytelling matters. So yeah, so that you guys, it's like you already read my slides. So that's kind of the number one thing. Consistency is huge in building your brand as an individual. And it doesn't mean, it's not like every day I come off like I am with you all today. I scream, I have moments where I get super frustrated. I don't always contain my emotions. I am not always as eloquent in the way that I'm speaking, but I try very hard to think about the things that matter most to me in building my brand, that I'm extremely consistent on that. So for example, when my team comes to me with a difficult situation, they know that I'll handle it in a caring and inclusive way. And I make sure that I'm extremely consistent on that, because those are two things that I care very much about in my personal leadership brand. Next is the feelings that others have while and after interacting with you and your team. So some of this, again, this is where you can't control everything, but you can certainly influence it over time. And particularly in big settings like this, I try to think a lot about, how do I want folks to feel after this? What do I want them to walk away with? Is there like a tingly feeling that they can get? Is there a certain sense of energy that they can build from this? The quality and access of your work. So ensuring that people can kind of connect to your portfolio, or that you're targeting the right audience. Let's say you have a niche medium, or you have a certain passion or certain style that you like to work in or work with. Really making sure that you're understanding those audiences to connect with them in new and different ways. Perceptions obviously always play into what it means to build a personal brand. And a lot of times actions speak louder than words in that scenario. So really thinking about kind of how you show up instead of what you're always saying. Influencing outcomes aligned with your personal brand vision, and particularly in the difficult moments, like really when people are kind of watching how you show up when you're under pressure or when there's a difficult situation ahead of you. That's when kind of influencing those outcomes aligned to your values and to your vision become critically important. And then on some level, and I put this last on purpose because a lot of people start with building their brand at the social media level first, or kind of at their portfolio, or building their Medium page, or making sure they have a robust Figma portfolio. But oftentimes, if you don't get some of these other pieces in place and have those be true first, then it's a lot harder to build the right social media presence, and you can kind of feel a little bit all over the place. I feel like being relatable also helps. Yeah, that's a really great point around being relatable. But I think relatable, kind of when we talk about words like that, it becomes very, okay, well, relatable to whom is kind of the question I always ask, right? And so all of this is very much in the context of, what do you care about? Whom do you care has these perceptions of you, right? And so this is just a brief list of 5 questions that I kind of ask myself on a yearly basis, at least, around who I am, how I'm showing up as a leader, and really thinking about that notion of like, who do I care about and building a brand identity with and building brand trust with? Who do I feel like I need to cultivate that with more? Who do I feel like I need to invest in more in order to build that brand identity, versus the folks that I either know at my core kind of believe in that already for me, and they can be my champions. They actually can be the ones to go personify that for me, or kind of, who are the ones that I actually don't care about, right? And sometimes I spend more time focusing on, well, I don't need to be relatable to these types of folks because they're not going to be part of my future and part of where I'm going. The second big question I ask in building a leadership brand is, what attributes do I collectively want to be known for? So as I mentioned, kind of being empathetic, being inclusive, being human-centered in the way I work is kind of a core aspect to really allow myself to kind of show up the way that I want to and to be the type of leader that I want to. I think radical transparency is a great one for me as well. I don't have a great filter always. I don't have a poker face. I'm very, very transparent about where I am, how I feel, what my opinions are on a topic, whether I should have an opinion or not. But that also means I know where my weaknesses are usually, and I ask readily for my blind spots. And so I also make that list of things that I don't want to be associated with or that I don't want to be known for. And then going into the action-oriented side on the bottom of the list of questions is, how can you better hone your skills and capabilities? How can you make sure that the way that you're presenting yourself, whether it is through your portfolio, through your resume, through the type of network that you're building, for example, in your social media channels, kind of really help you to hone and represent that brand that you want to build. And then at the end of the day, a lot of brand building comes down to those 4 guiding principles, right? And the one around being simple. And so at the end of the day, at any point in my life, now the one that's most important to me can change, but I try to pick one that's most important for me to kind of show up and represent every single day, and to bring that best piece to life. Right now, I would say kind of the one that I'm focused on the most is around this notion of value. I want to make sure that I'm providing and getting a lot of value out of every single thing that I do. And so that's kind of how I'm weighing the way that I'm building my brand, kind of how I think about leading my team is how I can provide the most value to them and how I can help them amplify the value that they can bring to market. So Oki says, so like building a company brand, personal brand strategy is the foundation before picking the right marketing strategy to build that brand. Yeah, that's exactly right, Oki. And I think, again, just like you would build a company brand, you would kind of think about those 4 principles around what's the simplest way to articulate something, what's the why of that company, right? What's the purpose? Why are they put on planets? What's the value that people get out of them? How does your brand kind of guide the way that you behave and interact with others? And then what makes it true? What makes it real? What are the reasons to believe? And so as we think about that with these kind of questions too, to what audiences, what attributes, right? Then that's exactly right. So as you start to build your own personal brand strategy, then you also can figure out the channels you want to invest your time in. You can figure out the ways that you want to engage and the ways that you don't, right? And it becomes very clear why, although maybe all of your friends and peers are going to TikTok, it doesn't align with your brands. It doesn't align with where you want to personify yourself. And so maybe you want to use a different channel to build kind of that leadership brand for you. So kind of some of the last words here before we can go into questions and open up for a conversation. But I think at the end of the day, being intentional about seeing yourself as a leadership brand, making it a choice, is probably the first step in all of this, right? And, J.K. Rowling, I love her, but she kind of says it best. It is our choices that show what we truly are far more than our abilities. And so with that, I'll just leave you with kind of, okay, well, how would you get started to think about your own personal brand strategy and what that means? So as Oki so pointedly put into the chat, first you start with that define phase, right? Really make space, be intentional in defining your brand. Who are you? Not necessarily who are you as a person, but who do you want to be known as? How do you want others to kind of know you and engage with you, just like a company would build their brand? Define the values that matter to you and that matter most to the audiences you want to engage. From there, I kind of like to think about it as a design phase, right? Spend 15 to 30 minutes a week being intentional about the messages, the influences that you're putting out into the marketplace, and really start to test and ensure what those key elements of your brand are. The third one, once you're starting to design and kind of put some things out there, see what's gaining traction, then you can start to experiment, right? Really start to think about what channels, what new types of things you can put out there. So one big experiment for me this year was actually putting a picture of myself as a working mom, a picture of that onto LinkedIn, and to really kind of see what the response rate was to that. Then listen, right? I spend a lot of time getting feedback. I know everyone kind of says feedback is a gift, and it not always is a gift, but it certainly is something that helps you get better over time. Sometimes it's a gift like broccoli, or think of the grossest vegetable that you've had to eat in your life. But and really kind of that listening phase, that feedback phase is a good time for reflection, and really making sure that you are showing up, that you are building something that's not only authentic to you, but is going to bring you into the future, and kind of help you to get to where you want to go, not necessarily stay where you are. And then last but not least, choose, make very thoughtful choices, be consistent in those choices, and show up that same way every single time. So this is kind of the practical guide to that. Now, I know we have a couple questions in here. Kyla asks, can you share some more practical tips for those vocalizing their thoughts and perspectives? Personally, I find it difficult to publicize or voice out my POVs, and I feel like it's hindering me in building my personal brand and leadership. So Kyla, that is such a fantastic question and so thoughtful, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And particularly, for us, there's a lot of women on this call. I think in a lot of cultures and a lot of places around the world, it's not always commonplace or accepted to have a strong opinion or strong point of view on something. It's something I certainly have faced many times in my career. I think the best way to do it is, one, really write down your boundaries on where you want to speak up and where you don't. Because although, like I said, and particularly in the face when I probably should back down sometimes, so that's part of my personality. But I have found when I feel insecure about it or feel vulnerable about it, or when I actually have been told to stop, right, to really then reflect on what matters most to me first and foremost, where do I want to speak up versus where I don't, and then find the way that's most comfortable for you. So I'll give a personal example. As many of you know, or might not know, but maybe have read in the news, we have struggled a lot with gun violence in the United States. I get choked up even talking about it, but it's an area. My sister's an elementary school teacher in the United States. My daughter is 3.5 and goes to public school. And it's a place where, despite that I have friends who don't believe in protecting, having more protective laws against gun control and some of those types of things, it's a place where I have chosen to speak up where I feel comfortable. It's not a place where I confront everyone on it. We have lost a family member to these particular gun incidences in the United States, but it's one where I won't back down. And it's one where I've kind of decided I don't actually care if people don't agree with me. But I don't do it like I'm not like a Facebook poster. I do tend to post a lot on Twitter in that, just because it's a channel that's a little bit more anonymous, and I feel like I can just express my very vulnerable feelings in a way that doesn't have to get into an altercation with maybe some of those people that I love. So I kind of have picked and chosen the channels that fit for me and fit for the message that I'm willing to deal with the consequences. I think that's one way to think about it, Kyla, is pick the ones that you're really feeling strongly about, or that you want to have a great opinion because they align to the brand that you want to put out there, but the ones that you're willing to kind of see through the consequences and show up consistently for, no matter what happens. So I don't know if that's helpful. That was kind of a long-winded answer, but trying to show a little bit more of a personal example, and one that's pretty controversial, at least here in the United States, for you to kind of, I don't know, hopefully take something from. But I'm happy to talk more about that too, because not everyone feels comfortable even showing up in social media, right? And so I think some of it's about, is it about the pictures that you post that can say more words than your own words? Is it about the community that you get involved in and you play an active role? So building your brand doesn't just have to be about, I think, what we traditionally think about, which is those like social media channels or digital channels. It can also be about who and how you show up and where you choose to invest your time and your energy. All right, sorry, thanks for my very emotional talking about that, but that was just a very real example. So hopefully it helps you. So tips on how niche down to get the right clients and define your brand. So I think on that standpoint, and this is probably, if I can read into this, but thinking a little bit more about as you're building a business, right? And who you should bring on and who you shouldn't. And I think some of it I don't think you have to get down to the level of like, I like this person or I like this particular company and not that one. I do think when you think about how to find the right clients and how to define your brand, I think having very strong qualification up front that align to your values is really important, and things that actually help you say no. And that's kind of one way to test it. I think the best strategies are the ones that tell you what not to do. And brands are a strategy for kind of how you show up, right? For your engagement and for your consistency. And so what I would say there is ensure that you're making a list in defining clients by things that you can say no to. And that's really hard when you're an entrepreneur and when you're maybe starting a small consulting firm or a design firm. But I think if you think about it from a standpoint of what are the customers, how do you balance customers in a way that you can make as much money as you need to, but that you can get enough energy, you get enough out of those relationships to help fuel your brand going forward, that's when you know to invest. And so I kind of look at that balance that way. And then the ones that just continuously suck a lot of energy out of you, like you just feel exhausted after doing work for them, those are probably not the right clients to move forward with. And those are the ones, if you start to look at the assets, if you start to look at the attributes around why they're exhausting to you, those are the ones that you can start to use to maybe phase out and focus on other types of relationships or customers. So I hope that helps a little bit. All right, well, thanks everyone for all of the thoughts. If you should share your vulnerabilities while building your personal brand. Recently, I started watching Brene Brown videos, and she talks about vulnerability a lot and says it helps. So that is a great question. And, quite frankly, it's one where females have been criticized as leaders in the past of being too emotional, right? And showing maybe their vulnerabilities too much. I think, as you all can tell, I am very comfortable showing my vulnerabilities and probably do it too often as well. But it's one of those things that I have always been a very emotional, sensitive person since I was younger, since being in like 3rd grade when I used to get bullied by some of my friends. I was always the most emotional, sensitive one. And so it was something I actively chose when I became a marketing executive to embrace as part of my leadership brand, as part of that strong belief in radical transparency. I think embracing vulnerability, if it feels authentic to you, is important. Not everyone embraces vulnerability in the same way that I do, right? Not everyone's willing to like bring the tears forth and like keep going. But I think finding the right way to embrace your vulnerabilities. Some folks do that through writing, right? And they kind of express, maybe they don't ever come off as vulnerable in person or in one-on-one interactions, or even when they're speaking to a crowd, but they can write how vulnerable they are. They can write where they are in that moment, in an email or in a Slack post. Others, a lot of times on our team, I'll put a lot of my vulnerability into different types of video messages. So we use Slack a lot at Salesforce, obviously. It's some of our technology, but they have this great kind of video note feature where you can put a lot of vulnerability in it, but you don't necessarily have to face the emotional reaction from that in the moment. So I think there's a lot of different ways that feel authentic to your brand and authentic to a channel or a medium where you feel comfortable bringing your brand to life in a vulnerable way. Is kind of a way to think about it, right? It's not that you have to show up vulnerable all the time or that you always need to start with vulnerabilities, but it means that you kind of find the appropriate ways and the appropriate intersections for when vulnerability helps to build your brand and your credibility and when it doesn't. Hopefully that's helpful. Now, for some of you, you might be kind of thinking a little bit about, well, I'm a designer. This doesn't really have that much to do with kind of the actual craft of design. But I think, as we've talked about a little bit, is the power of storytelling. And so sometimes building a brand, a brand is just a story that you tell about yourself over and over and over again. And so as we think about building our own personal brands and investing into that, just like we would design a logo or build a brand strategy for a company, then it's very much kind of the same vein, right? You're designing who you are and how you want to be shown to the world, and what pieces you actually want to show and which ones you don't. And so I think it requires a design mindset. It requires certainly a human-centered mindset around kind of what matters to you and kind of what experiences you want to be part of, and then how to control the ones that you don't, or how to influence the ones that you don't in the right way. And so, yeah, Oki says that's the key word right there, authenticity. So does this mean that being genuine can go a long way rather than creating a whole other persona? And I think, Oki, I personally think that's what's changed in leadership lately, because anyone can be a leader. That notion of like, I have to be different. I have my work persona and I have my personal persona has been able to change a lot, has been able to shape differently a lot. And I think it was a lesson I learned early on in consulting, actually, that people buy from people that they like to work with. And so I think as we build our personal brands, I think about the people I like to work with. And so that's kind of what I put out in the world. And I've been fortunate enough to work at now a company of like 75, almost 80,000 individuals that all at least think like me on one or two of our values. And that's made kind of all the difference in the world for kind of what I can do with my brand and kind of where I've been able to take it. So another question came in: how can we create space for a brand in the market that is already saturated without really having a unique story yet, and figure out who's the right audience for the brand? Also, how can we increase the brand presence and increase visibility? Okay, so that's a really, really great question, Shreyashi. I think, so the first part of the question is, how do we create space for a brand in a market? First and foremost, there's a lot, although a market is competitive, although you may seem or feel like you look like everyone else in your role or in your type of role, because you're you have a unique story of how you got there. And what I mean by that is you had different influences, you may be inspired by different things, or you may admire different people that you want to get to. So I think really, I kind of always focus on like that simple notion, and being purposeful. So if you combine simple and purposeful, you can kind of think about, well, what is that origin story for me? Why did I start doing what I wanted to do? Why do I want to be good at it? Right. And then right there alone, you have kind of your own unique story, your own unique perspective of how you cultivated that, how you got to where you are today, and what that means. The other big piece in terms of create space for a brand in a market that's already saturated, a lot of times what I have seen work, and this actually happened, it wasn't about a personal brand, but it was about an actual brand. So when we were developing Colgate Optic White, they were the 6th or 7th whitening toothpaste in the market. People didn't believe in whitening toothpaste as it is. And we were really struggling to kind of come up with something that was new and differentiated for this big brand launch. So what we actually started doing to create space for that brand was focus on the problem itself, which is people didn't believe in whitening toothpaste. So we had to go and look at the outcome first, which is what would we be able to say to get someone at a grocery store to believe in that brand enough to pick it up and buy it. And so it allowed us to kind of work backwards from like the claim on the package, the actual words that would get someone to buy something or try something different, which then drove what the actual technology is. So if I had to apply it to this situation, and I have worked with individuals in the past around kind of how to position themselves in a different way, I would say start with your end outcome. Start with that end goal of kind of what you're trying to position. If you're trying to get a new job, if you're trying to launch a company, if you're trying to get your design portfolio out there, right? Start with that as a goal, and then start to think about, well, how can I do that differently? What does the market need differently? Who are the most important people that I need to get to believe and driving towards that end destination? So that's kind of one way to start about it, is starting with that kind of, what is the end destination that I want to do by this activity? And then kind of what are the best ways to work backwards from there? I think the other thing around the right audience for your brand, some of that is just a little bit of trial and error, to be honest. But I think if it comes to like getting a certain job, then it's about like making sure that you're in the spheres of influence that are related to that space. So take, for example, if you wanted to get a job at Salesforce, then I would be making sure that you're starting to interact with as many people as you can at Salesforce, or people that you know that are partners of Salesforce, or people that you know that maybe have become trailblazers of Salesforce or have interest in Salesforce, right? And really start to just get yourself in that ecosystem. And then you can kind of start to see who are the right people that I need to connect with in there. So it's more about picking like the cohort of people, not necessarily getting to like the exact right person or the exact right audience, but kind of knowing I need to be in these kind of spaces. I need to be in tech spaces. I need to be thinking about customer relationships, and I need to be thinking about kind of how to build engagement experiences, those types of things. And then that can kind of help you steer to the right people over time, the more people that you talk to. And then also, how can we increase brand presence and increase visibility? So one of that is about consistency, right? So as I mentioned, brand presence is actually something, and visibility is actually something that doesn't have to be expensive. The way that I kind of always have looked at it is to build brand visibility, build brand increase is kind of 3 different ways. One, be highly relevant, right? So be in the places talking about the things that is on kind of everyone's mind, because they tend to pick up quickly, right? And you'll get a lot of views or things that'll happen when you're highly relevant to what's happening. And let's say you have a different perspective on it, or you've thought about the problem in a different way. The second way is time and consistency. So as I mentioned, just really working to be consistent every single day. I work with there's an amazing photographer that I work with who's become a good friend of mine. And she's built her entire business off Instagram. And she's just done it because she consistently posts 1 or 2 reels and 1 or 2 very powerful messages consistent with her brand every single day. So it just allows her to be top of mind. So whenever I'm on Instagram, she happens to pop up, right? She happens to be in my feeds. So I'm constantly seeing her. Yeah, I'll definitely, give me 30 seconds and I can give you her profile. She's an amazing photographer. She used to be based out of New York City. Now she's in Dallas, Texas. And she's actually a woman who used to do fitness photography. So she was kind of part of the like professional fitness scene. And then now she's gone into a lot of like women empowerment and a lot of like baby photography. So it's pretty cool to see her transformation. But that's kind of one way, I think, is to increase your brand presence. So there's relevance, there's kind of consistency and investment of time as kind of the second big tactic. And then the third one, of course, is money, right? Like the more money you put in a lot of these brand presence and increasing the visibility, the more you're able to amplify your voice through traditional channels, I would say. And so really thinking about that thoughtfully. I personally think the organic growth where you focus on the time and the relevance tends to get you further. But if you need to go faster, then money can also open a lot of doors in that space. I'm sorry to be looking down. I just want to make sure I get her profile, the right one for you. Any other questions? Oh, the whitening toothpaste. Yeah, definitely. I have become a huge proponent of starting with the end in mind. Like what actually are you trying to change? And then let's work backwards from like what needs to be true, what needs to get out of the way, kind of how does that look? So her name is Anya. So her personal profile is Anya Art Fit, which I just put in there, and that's on Instagram. And then her professional profile is Art Fit Baby. And she's actually the one who did my LinkedIn photos. So if you like that photography aesthetic, you can see a sample of her work. I did my own. I never ever kind of invest. Clearly, I never invest in like myself from a vanity standpoint. And so after having my second child and kind of everything that was going on last year, I decided I just needed to have what I called a female empowerment session. So I got my own photo shoot. I redid all my headshots. I got a makeup artist to come in and like help do all my makeup, got my hair done. So sometimes you just need to take that moment to invest in yourself too, as part of your brand building process. And even if it seems silly or it seems like frivolous at the time, which is why I tended not to do those things, it can make a big difference. So thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? Hopefully this was helpful. My whole hope for this is that you walked away with at least one little nugget that maybe helped you think differently about yourself and your brand and what's possible for you as a leader going forward. And that also gave you some practical advice and maybe some of the things that you're facing today. I think some of you might have reached out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop me a note. I don't actually accept LinkedIn invites unless I've met you and had a conversation. It's part of my brand building process. If someone ever asks me, oh, do you know Oki or do you know, Miriam or anything, I want to make sure that I've at least had one conversation with you so that I can credibly pass on good feedback. So feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn or reach out for a further convo. Happy to engage in any other way.